Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be hailing from. Welcome to Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents, episode number 33. And I've got to say, ever since I jumped in on RHEL Presents as one of the hosts, I cannot say I've been more excited about bringing you a particular episode than I am today. So much so that I'm peeking my microphone here. Sorry about that. All right. While I adjust that, let me bring in my trusty co-host, Brian Smith, Mr. System Rolls himself.
Hey, Eric, how's it going?
I got to tell you, I'm excited. Fedora has been one of my true loves. Don't worry, my wife knows she's okay with it. But Fedora Linux is one of my all-time favorite distributions. I was a Fedora lover before I ever even thought about working for Red Hat, so that's not just, the company line. Fedora 35, right here, right next to my desk, purring away happily. So I don't know, man. I'm excited.
No, I'm right there with you. I'm running Fedora 35 on my laptop right here, so I feel the same way you do. Really excited about this show.
Now, I don't know how I feel about our guest. I mean, Matthew Miller, he's out there. He's always on podcasts. I mean, I had to bribe him to bring him on the show. Actually, no, I just said, "Hey, you want to come hang out with us?" He's like, "Yeah, sure. That sounds great. I don't know what it is, but let's do it." Without further ado, allow me to introduce our guest for today, Mr. Matthew Miller. Welcome to Red Hat Enterprise Linux Presents.
Hey, and the bribe was basically, you won't have to prepare anything. It's very effective on me.
Yeah, it's like, just show up, talk about your thing.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to do that.
All right, Mr. Matthew Miller, welcome to RHEL Presents. You want to tell us what it is exactly you do? Because I think a lot of people will find it interesting to know that you actually are a Red Hat employee.
Yeah, so I'm Matthew Miller, Matt DM on pretty much everywhere that I can get that, and some places I've been there long enough that I've gotten it. I'm proud of that. It's harder and harder to snag one's short name on the internet.
Right.
So I am the Fedora project leader, which I've been doing since 2014, almost 8 years now, which is sort of set a new normal for Fedora project leadering. It's been kind of a short-term role that burned people out, and it's actually something I can talk about a little bit later. But I'm still excited about it, still going strong and enjoying it quite a lot. The Fedora project leader doesn't get to boss anybody around. I am a Red Hat employee, but I don't have it's not a management role; it's an individual contributor role. So everything I do, both inside and outside of Fedora, is through influence, and the strength of that influence really comes from me listening to everybody's good ideas and trying to figure out how we as a collective group can move forward in the strongest way. And that's basically what my job is on the high level. And then the day-to-day turns out to be various incarnations, big and small, of trying to make that happen.
Yeah, it's like I'm a technical marketing manager, and that's a little bit of a misnomer because I actually, like you, don't manage anyone. I am a technical marketing manager, so I'm managing content and due dates and release cycles. So yeah, it's
Yeah, my title is an engineering title, distinguished engineer, in fact, and I don't actually do much engineering per se. So yeah.
So Matthew, on the off chance we have people watching who aren't familiar with Fedora, can you give us an overview, like what is Fedora?
Yeah, so Fedora is a community project that builds a Linux distribution, which we call Fedora Linux, or also Fedora for short. I like to try and say Fedora Linux to make the distinction. Fedora is people, like Soylent Green, except for a little bit less creepy. It's a project that's been since 2003, 2004 or so, working on making a free and open source operating system that everybody can use to run on everything from your own personal computers up to server, cloud, any kind of infrastructure things. And it is a fast-moving distribution that's part of our charter and part of the history. It came from the Red Hat Linux distribution, and Red Hat Linux split into RHEL and Fedora. That's kind of an oversimplification, but they kind of split into this enterprise product-y thing and a fast-moving, community-driven distribution. And so that fast-movingness is part of the charter. And it also serves as the upstream project for RHEL. That is, all of the things that go into RHEL flow through Fedora, community decision, community built things, and then Red Hat takes the output of that and makes a product from it on a regular basis. Now with CentOS Stream as part of the process. So is that enough? I can do more.
No. So one other question I had is like, who's the target audience for Fedora?
So I would say the target audience really is anybody who's interested in it. And for a little while there, we were really trying to focus on, say, software developers and maybe system administrators as kind of a more technical audience, because, to be honest, we were in a little bit of a hard time as a project, and we were kind of finding where we were going and finding, our base. And it felt like that audience was the one that was most likely to be receptive to the things we had, maybe more able to deal with some of the challenges around configuration and things that weren't quite as easy, and also would be maybe most likely to be contributors back and help us grow. I think in the last 5 years, we've, and particularly the last 3 years, we've done a really good job, and a lot of things have all come together, on the desktop, but also on the IoT and server and all these things, cloud, where you don't have to be an expert. I think it's a great Linux distribution for anybody who's interested in it. But I will say, and I don't want to give any illusions, we try to make this really easy. Some of the things are difficult. Partitioning a disk, getting it all set up, there's a little bit of nerdiness to it that has to appeal to you. We're working to make this as mass market possible, and there are systems you can buy it pre-installed on, which will make it very easy. But I think it really, any distribution is most fun if you're into it, if it's a thing that appeals to you, and that doesn't have to be a technical appeal. I think the thing actually that is the most exciting to me about Linux in general and distributions like Fedora in particular is that it actually is something that belongs to us. It isn't something that belongs to Red Hat. Red Hat, owns some trademarks and some things and hires people, but the overall software is all licensed in a way for sharing. And as a community project, it's something that belongs to the people who are the users and the contributors. And it's kind of, it's not a thick line. You can easily be a user who contributes a little bit, and you become part of the project that way. And in doing that, Fedora really becomes yours. And I think that's the thing that's really interesting about it. It's not just like the geeky technology, which is cool, but just that this is a thing we're all making together. And you can be a Windows fan, you can be a diehard Steve Jobs Apple fan, you can work for those companies even, but even then, those operating systems, Android, whatever, they're not yours. They belong to the company. And something like Fedora, it belongs to you. It belongs to everybody, and that's the really exciting thing to me about it.
Well, don't undersell Fedora Linux, because a lot of work has been done on the installer, on the initial login with the GNOME desktop to make it easier. There's tours, there's links to docs, and one of the best things is you mentioned disk partitioning. You can take the defaults, and it is a sane set of defaults. So arguably, someone who's used to the Windows installer where it's just click, 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 click. Yes, I agree, and then let it install, can do that with Fedora more or less and get a good experience out of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I should say part of my role in my job, I am a figurehead for the project, so I try to represent that. But I'm not really a marketing person or a salesperson at heart. And a lot of what I do is try to look at problems and fix them. So it's sometimes a little bit easy for me to lead first with the difficulties. And so yeah, I think it is a nice slick distribution that is easy to use. Um, I just again, I'm full of caveats. It's I've been another thing I've been doing recently, which is not Fedora related. I'm using Fedora IoT to do it, Fedora
Hmm.
stuff, but I'm setting up home automation stuff in my house with
Oh,
Z-Wave
nice.
and Zigbee lights and switches, and kind of going all out, driving my family crazy. It turns out that you need more than 95% reliability for light switches for your family to not be annoyed. So
Yep.
this is very fun. It's easy, and the software around it, like Home Assistant, all of it. You could do some great stuff, but you also have to be interested in doing it. Like you have to be like, I'm doing this for the fun of making my light switches go, and therefore, when we're at 99.99% reliability, sometimes like where that other 0.01%, you're like, yeah, okay, that's going to be that way. And I think with all of this software that is open source software that we're all putting together, there are some things that are sometimes frustrating that we can't get around, like software patents that we can't evade. There are things that are blockers. There are things where the usability isn't super polished. The functionality of something like Adobe Photoshop, which has a company pouring amazing research into it, like they actually like the research and graphics and all that stuff going into that. We've got amazing people in open source doing great things with our graphical tools, but like that single focus on market problems, it's we don't necessarily have that. So I think it helps to understand that this is something that we're doing as a community, and that you are part of making it better. It's not just a product being delivered to you.
Hmm.
Will give you a better experience. And that's not just with Fedora, that's with any open source project coming at it that way. Not as I'm entitled to get this product from somewhere, but that I am part of this, and rough edges and all, and that's part of actually what makes it special.
Gotcha. So let's dive in a little bit here to Fedora Linux itself, and I love the distinction that you're trying to bring between Fedora, the community, the people, and Fedora Linux. I love that, and I hope it catches on. Uh, so one of the things that you mentioned was that Fedora is fast moving. So how does that impact the release cadence?
So we have a release once every 6 months, almost like clockwork. We had a few years there of actually exactly meeting our on-time plan schedule. We missed it just this last one, and I'm a little bit scared about this current one. But basically, we every 6 months we have a beta freeze, release a beta, then do a little bit more development and testing, and then final release. So that comes out basically end of April, end of October every year, new release. So we're coming up on 36. I actually just updated this laptop to the beta release. So the beta's not actually out. It's the release candidate for the beta. I thought, okay, time for the laptop. What could go wrong? And then right before the show, crashed. It crashed all the way down to oh, there's the Lenovo boot screen. So and then I booted it back up again, did the same thing again, and it crashed again. So I haven't figured that out yet, but I do like that I could repeat the bug. So that's something. So we're still working on the beta. This actually has been a very stable laptop and setup for me. So I was pretty shocked to see that crash actually, but it is still in the beta, working on coming out.
And one thing I'll add on the 6 month release cadence is, in my experience anyway, the upgrades have worked really well and go really smoothly. So it's easy to keep up to date. I don't have to reinstall every 6 months or anything like that.
Yeah, that's crucial, and that actually came out of some work and research we did, where a while ago, I got some what I felt were kind of strange comments, because people would say to me, Fedora ought to be a rolling release, or it should be an LTS. And I'm like, which of those things did you want? Do you want it to be like changing all the time constantly, or you want it to be never changing? And so
Yes.
I did some, yeah, right. Well, that's true too. That's a whole nother problem. But I did some exploring on that, and really it was people like, I don't want to have to deal with an upgrade. Upgrades are so painful. And so, but that's the kind of the perception was with a rolling release, you never have to do an upgrade. And with LTS, you put upgrades off for 10 years and then deal with them, sort of the idea. I think we actually have something that is a best of both worlds for a lot of cases. Obviously, there are cases for those things, but one of the problems with a lot of rolling release systems, you can make a slow rolling release, but that's not very common. Usually what people mean is things are updated as they go. And one of the problems with that is that if as things are going along, there might be a major change, and it might land because it's Tuesday. Like you wake up one morning, and then the interface has changed, or some big thing is there, and surprise, and there may even be breaking changes, things that you needed to know about before you updated. So in order to do that, you actually kind of have to keep on top of it all of the time. And yeah, you're not actually you're basically just taking that upgrade pain and spreading it out all of the time, all along, which can again be fun if that's what you're into. Like if I encourage someone who's like, I like to see all the updates, I like to tinker, I don't mind if I wake up one morning and I have to debug my operating system. That's cool. And if that is you, the Fedora Rawhide branch actually is our development, always rolling development branch. You could do that, and I know people who do. But for our main branch, what we try to do is we try to reserve the big changes for the main releases so that you can know, okay, this came out, and then we've got an overlap of actually 7 months. So you can actually skip a whole release, and then you still have 1 more month in which you can schedule, okay, I'm going to do this upgrade. And we try to make it as painless as possible. So we've invested a lot of work into making it so that basically it's just like applying a set of software updates, except for instead of taking 5 minutes, it might take 15 minutes, a half an hour, and then you come back and it's upgraded, which was other than that crash, and me knocking over my water here, that was my experience on my laptop just now as well. It went very, very smoothly. And so it basically is very easy to do that update, but you also know, okay, I did this update. This may be, I've got a new version of GNOME now, so maybe I need to check my GNOME extensions if they're going to be new versions. I may have, some of the software may work a little differently. The UI may change a bit. So kind of you can schedule when you want to take that big change rather than having it come at you. And you still get security updates on those other releases. If you're on a rolling release and you decide, oh, I don't want to update, I'm not going to, I'm afraid of something's going to break, you're also not getting security updates. So
Right.
if you'd like to stay, if we have Fedora Linux 36 coming out, if you want to stay on 35 for a little while longer, that's cool. And we are updating, security updates for that as well. So.
Yeah, I've got to say that the upgrade process has become one of the smoothest operations. Like I said, you've got to set aside a little bit more time to do the upgrade itself. But I mean, for the most part, I've been. I think this workstation was built with Fedora 29, and I want to say that since then I've done every upgrade, and right now it's running Fedora 35. So I want to say it was Fedora 29, but it's an incredibly easy process.
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of pivot the conversation a little bit, that upgrade process has been filtering down into RHEL. So for those of us that are Red Hat Enterprise Linux users that are running RHEL 7 or RHEL 8 and are concerned about moving to the next major version, Fedora has got this down to just an art. It really is like 2 or 3 commands. I mean, you have to basically repoint your DNF utility to the newer repositories, and then do a system update and then a reboot, and it comes back up and you're done. And that's feeding Red Hat Enterprise Linux.
Yeah, I think for for those upgrades, there's a little bit more to do because the change goes 3 years at a time, or like, I don't know if you can go 6 years at a time. I don't know what the plans are around that. So there's a little bit of assistance that's needed from some other things to make sure that it's ready for the upgrade. But the basic thing there is upgrades in place are really convenient.
So let's talk about that a little bit. What does that development lifecycle look like? I mean, Fedora moves fairly quickly, and you say that to an enterprise systems administrator, and they look at you like you're nuts. So what does that development lifecycle look like today?
I'm sorry, I don't know how to other than the 6 month schedule. I mean, we've got about a release comes out. We've got about a month break. People start talking about the changes and things that are going. We have change proposals that go into that, and then those are looked at and approved. Maybe approved for the next release, discussed on our mailing lists, conversation spots, and then basically another month for those changes to go in, and then we're already in the beta period and going for the release to come out. So it moves pretty quickly like that. We do try to make sure that change, is managed carefully. So big things don't just land. There is a review process for all of these changes. There's a Fedora Engineering Steering Committee, which is an all-elected body who looks at all of these and evaluates them after the community discussion. And we have different editions. So we have a Fedora Server edition, which kind of looks at server use cases. That's probably interesting a lot to RHEL people, and that's kind of maybe the best way to preview and kind of get involved in what will happen next in RHEL itself as a server operating system. There's also a cloud spin / edition. That whole edition thing is a topic for a different podcast. But so if it's looking at cloud workloads running in Amazon EC2, those kind of things. Also kind of different use cases from the desktop, and we try to make sure that all of those things are addressed in a way that meets the different needs there as things are moving quickly. So then RHEL has now an official 3-year cadence. So we're I don't know how many times you have to actually do it on a 3-year cadence before it counts as really working, but we're coming up on the second one here, right? So RHEL 9 basically is sent to the Fedora release has a thing called ELN, which I think officially stands for nothing, but might be Enterprise Linux Next if you squint at it. And it is basically the Fedora Linux, a subset of Fedora Linux packages built with the same options that they'd be built for RHEL, which then makes it easy for the RHEL team to take that and bring that directly into CentOS Stream to become the next CentOS Stream release, which will then feed into the next major RHEL release.
Well, in RHEL's defense, we've hit every minor release every 6 months, so it's looking good for RHEL 9 for, like you said, our next big major release on the new cadence. So moving and one thing that's interesting that I'd be curious if you have an opinion about is, it used to be Fedora and then RHEL and then CentOS, and now CentOS Stream has moved in between Fedora and RHEL. So you've got Fedora, CentOS Stream, and then RHEL. So my question is, has that really impacted Fedora any, or have you seen an uptick?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think the situation before was a really weird one. There's really no other open source project that worked that way, where it was basically taking an existing thing and rebuilding it exactly like that and then offering it. Is a kind of a strange position to be in as an open source project. And well, there's some stuff around that CentOS Linux, like CentOS Plus and so on. The CentOS Linux had some things like this in a lot of ways was not really an open source project. If there was something you wanted different in CentOS Linux, the answer from the team was no, we're making it like RHEL, right? And there weren't engineering decisions being made except for in the release engineering infrastructure. So it wasn't really an open source operating system in the same way. I mean, open source project. It's open source operating system. The source is there under all the open source licenses, but the project wasn't running that way. And then Red Hat brought it into Red Hat by hiring some of the awesome people working on it for various reasons. But some of that reasons was like that was a kind of a strange model, and they wanted something to do something better, but didn't quite know where to fit. And I don't know if you followed this, but at some of the Fedora and conferences and things, we had some talks trying to explain that relationship. And one of them is some of the Red Hat product management-y people getting up there and giving talks about like MC Escher diagrams and Penrose triangles and like geometry that cannot exist in the real world, and describing the relationship between the three operating systems that way. And so that I don't know, just seeing that talk, you should see, okay, that's not a sustainable way to do this. So this new model really makes a lot more sense, where we've got a really consistent flow. And I think there's a nice, we had some internal diagrams that I thought should go into the public messaging, but never made it out there, of like a layer cake. And in the layer cake, the top layer is the community Fedora Linux project, where we have a community-oriented distribution where a lot of technical decisions, are really made by the community. That's you. That's anybody who wants to come and make something different. You can argue for it. You can do the work, and we'll make space for it if it seems like a good idea. Even if it's strange, we'll probably try to make a place for you to experiment with it, and you can actually really make a big impact on how the operating system will go. So it's community involvement and community decision making. So then the next layer down is the CentOS Stream layer, where it is open and transparent. And in a lot of ways, this is exactly the same development that used to be happening inside of Red Hat in a not transparent way once it forked off of Fedora. So this was already happening, but now it's brought out into the open, and a lot of engineering resources put on that. So Red Hat engineers are working on that, and now it's transparent, and you can see it. You can be involved in it. You can comment on it. You can make suggestions and patches. You can even do some big things around it. But ultimately, the engineering decisions are made by Red Hat, which is there are other open source projects that work this way. I'm not going to get in trouble by calling any out by name, but you can think of a lot of software where there's a company that has an open source thing, and you just expect, okay, the engineers of that company are the ones who get, there may be some sort of democracy, but those engineers' votes count 10 times anybody else's. And so the CentOS Stream thing as an open source project, fundamentally works that way. There's community input and involvement, but it is Red Hat decision making. And then the final layer of the cake is the product, RHEL product, which is done as a product, and it is done, all RHEL engineering, all RHEL decision making. There's some partner work that goes on there, but it's all done in a business corporate kind of way, which is fine. That's what people are paying for. So we have all those different things addressed in a model that I think, we can represent it with a cake rather than impossible geometry. So I like that a lot better.
So one question I had, Matthew, is are there areas where RHEL and Fedora Linux have kind of diverged and gone in different directions? I'm thinking like things like BTRFS. Like how is that handled? And
right. The ButterFS thing, right? Yeah. So that was some community folks were really felt pretty strongly about this, as we've been talking about making that our default file system since like 2007 or something like that. And the joke was always that it was 2 years off. People started feeling like it was really there. And some of the engineers from Facebook who actually worked on the file system, that's actually employed to work there on this, felt like it was ready. So we looked at that decision, and I actually, part of my job is to make sure that Red Hat doesn't freak out about what Fedora is doing. So I went and talked to people on the Red Hat product team and said, look, this is being explored, and the file system team for RHEL had made a decision a while ago that they were tired of 2 years off, always being 2 years off, and made some big commitments, in XFS and different directions. And so they looked at that and said, well, we're not planning on changing our commitments. And that is still true. So, they came into Fedora and said, here's why we made our decisions. This is what it is. And, we won't be able to help you if you do this. And so ultimately, Fedora weighed that and said, okay, that's okay. And I think we still have some things that are using. We still have XFS; those file systems are still available, but it is okay for those things to be different. I believe the ELN artifacts are built with the RHEL operating system, for file systems there, so they can be tested and compared that way. I think we wouldn't want to be in a place where we're diverging on really fundamental things, because Red Hat would become less interested in paying me and other engineers to actually keep working on this. Fedora could certainly make those decisions, but a lot of resourcing would collapse. So it's in our best interest to keep that stakeholder at least happy. But we also have a room to do a lot of experimentation around things that are not not interesting to RHEL right now. So I think the IoT, Internet of Things stuff is a really shining example. So Peter Robinson, Paul Whalen, Dennis Gilmore, a bunch of people working on ARM stuff before John Masters. So a bunch of people working on these things, cheerleading for it when it wasn't really a business concern of Red Hat's. So both making sure the ARM architecture worked, and then also developing something nice to run on these IoT devices in Internet of Things use cases that RHEL had basically said that's not very enterprise, that's not our market, and so we ended up making a Fedora IoT spin. Peter Robinson worked on that really hard, and it happened that some big companies saw that and said that's the thing we want, and came back to Red Hat and convinced Red Hat otherwise about whether this would be a worthwhile product. So we now have RHEL from Edge for that, and that kind of came out of this innovation that was happening in the Fedora space that Red Hat, was. Maybe it was kind of interesting, but had decided wasn't a focus, and then it actually became a useful focus. And then from that, we getting the RHEL automotive stuff coming up, which I think is going to be exciting. I would never have expected to buy a car running, running Linux, actually, for that matter. But running RHEL in a nice shiny new electric car. I personally have not had a car in like 20 years, but I might have to get one that runs RHEL.
Well, I think you've really highlighted both sides of the relationship between RHEL proper and Fedora Linux. Is Fedora has made a couple of through the community. Fedora has made a couple of planted a couple of flags, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and has said that we think that Btrfs is the way to go when it comes to file systems. At this point in time, RHEL doesn't agree with that stance. I don't want to say agree because that implies that there's some kind of conflict. Yeah. But RHEL says, okay, that's great. Go ahead, do your thing. We're going to stay on XFS, and don't throw anything at me, but I'm running Fedora 35 with XFS because that's what all my RHEL boxes run. But and that hasn't changed. And RHEL 9 is still going to be XFS or ext4 or one of the kind of the staple enterprise file systems. But what you pointed out was that RHEL for the Edge is now built off of work that the Fedora community went ahead and said, okay, Red Hat, we hear you. This isn't something that really appeals to you yet, but our community thinks this could be really cool, or this could solve some concerns. So we're gonna march ahead. And now Red Hat's like, hey, what'd be cool? It'd be cool if we had something that could run on a box about this big, and we could put like on a telephone pole. Fedora, do you have anything like that? And Fedora can go, yeah, sure, here we go. Let's talk. And so just because, I know some of the people in the audience are like, Red Hat should be running Btrfs. Well, it's not it's not, you can't say never in technology, but I love to watch the Fedora community because the next big business idea might come out of the Fedora community, like edge and IoT things, and automotive are areas that Red Hat is very interested in now and is just continuing to partner with Fedora to build these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wanted to highlight one comment we got here because I think this is kind of a misunderstanding. Somebody asked, can Fedora be described as a beta version of RHEL? Is the Fedora community acting as the QA team for RHEL? So can you clear that up, Matthew?
Yeah, I'd say RHEL has its own betas, so clearly not. I think that's basically a misunderstanding of how open source processes work, because this we are using things that are new. We're testing them, and we are trying to follow the latest things. And often we're experimenting with different things in a lot of different directions. But it isn't like, I guess beta for RHEL implies that you're not supposed to use it, and that the end case is finally a polished RHEL, and that's not actually it. It happens that that is one of the things that people, Red Hat does is use it in that way. But we actually, it's really important to us that Fedora Linux, Fedora Workstation, Fedora Server, Fedora Cloud, Fedora KDE Plasma Desktop, Fedora Mobile Edition in the works, right? All those things, those should be useful for themselves. And so that's important. And we actually do a lot of QA, and you can help with that QA for us and for ourselves and for this operating system. That is for us. And yeah, absolutely, that helps Red Hat. But so does everybody else testing and using that software anywhere. That's part of how the whole open source collaboration works. And then the engineering work that Red Hat puts back into RHEL benefits Fedora greatly. For example, all of the security stuff where Red Hat tracks all of the software that's in Fedora Linux for CVEs, security vulnerabilities, and makes sure that we as a project are aware of all of those things. And then works on fixes for a lot of these things, and make sure that we have them available to our community quickly. It's a two-way thing on the benefits there. And I also emphasize that Red Hat knows the value of it being really used. So a beta, this is something you see in software all the time. The number of people who are willing to run a beta is very small, and and what you do with the beta does not necessarily reflect real world use. So if Fedora Linux were just a beta, it would not be a success. It wouldn't work for what Red Hat needs. So it actually needs to be something that is stable, useful, functional, exciting in itself, rather than a beta. And Red Hat really recognizes the value of that as well, and that's why there's so much investment in it.
Well, I think just the number of people that, even within Red Hat itself, that use Fedora as their production workstation, or that runs as the hypervisor for their lab where they run RHEL instances. I think it speaks very highly of Fedora Linux and its stability, because so many of us are running Fedora as our production system. Does it meet the release cadence of, say, a financial institution? No. Does Fedora carry with it some of the certifications, government security certifications from different countries across the globe? No, it doesn't. So that's why it's not seen as a production system, and it kind of got a bad rap as a distro for developers, but it's really grown so much more beyond that. So I'm not a regular Fedora contributor, but it's almost like I take offense on Fedora's behalf that you would think that it's a beta. I love my Fedora system, and I would stake my I'd almost say stake my career on it, but I kind of do.
Right. Yeah, and production, is it production ready? There's different kinds of production.
It depends.
I think the sales folks would be very happy for us to say that it is certainly not enterprise production ready. It's not meant for that. But I'm gonna risk getting in trouble a little bit and say I think that it is actually useful for even enterprises to find some place where they can have Fedora running in production in their environment, because then when the next versions of RHEL come along, you'll be ready. Like you'll know what's there, and you'll be able to, like I said, back to that cake, like you can influence in a way that you cannot otherwise. It's definitely the case if you're a large enterprise customer, you've got a certain kind of influence, but there's the influence by doing, that you can do direct investment into something you care about. If you really want to prove to Red Hat that Btrfs is the way to go, like invest a lot into making it amazing in Fedora, and then it will be easy for Red Hat to say yes to that request later. So I think actually it's good to have Fedora running in places that might be otherwise seen as, we are a production solid RHEL shop.
Mm-hmm.
Making some space there will be worth your while.
Definitely.
So we're hopefully about a month away from Fedora 36. Is there anything big or notable in 36 that you're excited about?
I should have prepared for this question.
You told me you did the homework.
I did. I thought I said there wasn't any preparation. I don't think that this is a release with a lot of really shocking changes.
Okay.
We have some things that are building up. There is a new version of GNOME. I think there's a dark mode on the desktop if people are excited about dark mode. Those kind of things are there. And there are a lot of changes, although I think there's fewer changes than there had been in the previous ones. But things do continue to get more polished and better as they go along. If people want to shout out in the chat things they're excited about, I'll call them out here.
So far, it's just dark mode.
Yeah, people are excited about dark mode. I think. Yeah, I actually have a working memory of a lot of the changes that are going on as I'm worrying about them, but I've kind of just cleared it out with all of the other talking here. So,
to your point, Fedora 35 had a huge overhaul in the audio and multimedia stacks. I mean, things like Pipewire, things like Pulse Audio, a lot of changes in the multimedia stack. So there's quite a few things. And then I think Fedora, somebody in the chat will correct me if I'm wrong, but Fedora 35 also introduced GNOME 40, I believe. So there's some pretty big changes in Fedora 35. So it's comforting to someone who spends a lot of his time in the enterprise workspace to see a big change like Fedora 35 to be followed up with, we're just going to focus on polish. We're going to make things better. We're going to introduce subtle changes. Fedora 34 was GNOME 40.
Yeah, I was going to wait till you were done talking to correct you on that. But yeah, and I think that's been a nice. I think when GNOME 40 is basically GNOME 4.0 in some ways, right? And I think when GNOME 3 came out, there was a lot of shocking change all at once, and it was pretty hard. And I think that GNOME as an upstream and are landing this in Fedora as well, we manage that a lot better. And I think it's nice to also look at 34 and 35 and kind of see like the polish, one of the problems that sometimes happens is a new design hits, and then people who designed it are too busy and go off and do other things, and then the people who are actually exposed to it, like no plan. There's some Art of War quote here about a plan meeting reality does not survive, right? And that happens with designs as well. So it's nice to see GNOME designers and GNOME team taking the feedback. You can kind of see that evolve in 35 and 36 Fedora Linux releases as it's getting more and more polished. I hope to see more of that.
We also had a question kind of related to releases in the chat that I snagged to bring up. When does Fedora release ISOs? Is it just on the beta and then the release date, or do the ISOs get refreshed throughout?
So there are nightly builds of the ISOs as we're going up there, but they're not official. The only official releases are the betas and then the final releases. We have some community built rebuilds if you need to do that. I would like to have that done more often, but official ISOs imply an amount of QA that we don't necessarily have the ability to do and feel really good about it on a regular basis. So the updated ISOs are basically, they usually work. If you find a problem, please tell us level of QA. And you can also, if you want to install without having to then apply 2 gigabytes of updates, use a network-based install that applies updates as you go, which kind of gives you the same effect as that. I see in the comments that one of the changes for the desktop is Wayland by default for NVIDIA users. That'll be a big desktop change going by. So that's going back to the previous thing, and now I've wiped what I was just saying from my memory by saying that.
That's why I have Brian on as a co-host, because I see something pop up and I'm like, ooh, let's talk about that.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Matthew. So we mentioned GNOME a couple of times here. What does your personal Fedora install look like? What window manager are you using? What desktop environment? Like,
if you say Windows, I will kick you off the show.
Yeah, no, I've honestly, Fedora it's been my operating system since 2004, with maybe a brief divergence into CentOS a couple times on my desktop in the early days of it, like CentOS 5 kind of desktop for a little while, and then once that got too old, back to Fedora desktop. But sorry. So I am running GNOME, and I'm running with only a few extensions. My extensions list has reduced a little bit. I am still a sysadmin at heart, even though I don't do any sysadminning anymore. So I tend to have like 5 terminal windows open at any one time for whatever reason. And so the native window placement extension really makes it easier to manage a bunch of windows that look alike on the screen. So I like that. And there's an extension called Impatience, which does nothing but speed up the animations, and it makes your computer feel like it's 5 times faster. So those are my must-have extensions. But basically, the stock Fedora Linux GNOME is what I go with, and I'm pretty happy with it. I like this minimalist get out of the way thing. I like the hit the key with the little overview icon on it, so it shows you your different windows in a little grid of 4 different windows. That key that's on most people's keyboards, you push that to search for things. I think that's a good UI.
What about hardware? Any hardware preferences?
So this is the Lenovo Gen 8 system. It's I believe to be the very first one shipped with Fedora Linux. But from the store, like not a pre-released one. I was told, hey, it's up there, and I bought it right away. Actually, Red Hat bought it for me. I'm out of my normal laptop cycle, but I went to my boss and said, I know there's no real justification for this, but will you buy me a new laptop? And so I got a yes to that. So that's my system here.
So you kind of brushed by this, but we kind of talked about how Fedora isn't like a production distribution, but did I hear you correctly that Lenovo actually ships Fedora straight from the factory?
Yeah, absolutely. And this was really cool, actually. So one thing that's customers were coming to them and saying, we would like to buy this. So this wasn't like a deal we pushed them for or some sort of cross thing, like their customer demand. And then they came to us and said, how can we do this and how can we do it right? And I've really enjoyed working with them. COVID supply chain things have been a little bit frustrating because a lot of things didn't come together. Like we wanted to have it worldwide, and some models that were supposed to happen just didn't happen. And Lenovo's been hit really hard with that, so that's been frustrating. But they've been really nice to work with. And one of the things I think is most amazing, they wanted it to be. They didn't want a customized version, and we actually talked to some laptop manufacturers before, and they were very much into how can we modify this to be how we like it, how can we get our kernel there, how do we put our drivers, and they were like, we want this to work all open source out of the box with just like we want to make as few modifications as possible. The only thing we ended up having to do, we actually made a special trademark licensing rule difference where they are allowed to drop their docs into the image into a opt directory because they need, for regulatory reasons, to ship some documentation. So that seemed like a fine compromise. Their docs are not open source, but everything else is unmodified stock Fedora Linux out of the box with nothing strange. So I really, that was great, and we continue to have a great relationship with that team.
That's awesome.
That was so awesome.
Are there any other hardware vendors that ship Fedora straight from the factory?
I know Slimbook does
That's right.
I think in Spain. I don't know of any other major ones. There are a number of smaller, places that will put it on a system and sell it. Usually, like the Clevo branded laptops, which are fine but not super fancy, and so it's available in those ways. But yeah, Lenovo is the only really major distributor of laptops. If somebody else is listening to this and wants to do it, talk to me. We'd like to make it easy for you, honestly, and no matter big or small.
Awesome.
What's the best way for somebody to start contributing to the Fedora project? And do you have to be like a software engineer and have all these skills to contribute?
I'm glad you asked that question. So I actually just asked Red Hat's HR for this information. Red Hat just hit 20,000 people, and so I asked what percentage of those people are engineers, and it came back there's like just under 30% are in the product and development part of the business, and of those a lot of people are managers, product managers, business, other things that aren't actually engineering roles. So it's something like 15% of the company is actually engineers in this 20,000 person company. So there's a clear Red Hat is a successful money-making company and is not paying all those other 17,000 people to do nothing. It is actually part of the vital functions of making the business work. And although open source projects tend to be very heavily weighted towards engineers, we actually have all of those same needs, and so we're actually desperate for people with skills that are in those areas of marketing, making podcasts, design, human resources like things, sales like things. Some degree of technical is nice, but you don't really have to be technical. Open source projects like Fedora need all of those skills. Writers, I don't know. I think of something you can do in a job, and we can probably find a place for you to use those skills in the Fedora project. And of course, we also do have plenty of technical roles. Some coding, a lot of packaging, a lot of integration work, a lot of sysadmin style work is important. And the easiest way to get involved really is we have a group called the Join Special Interest Group, the Join SIG, and we had kind of tried to have a lot of different, here's some guides to getting started, but we really find kind of the human touch works best. So you introduce yourself to the Fedora Join SIG, either they've got a mailing list or on Matrix on the Fedora Join chat room there, and just say hello and say, I would like to get involved. And they actually have a process where I follow a ticket and you go through some steps and they kind of find out what you're interested in and what you'd like to help with and hook you up with people who can help, mentor you and get you going in what you want to do.
That's awesome.
Cool. I've got to say, I am really excited about everything that Fedora is doing. And I wish we had hours to talk and chat and unfortunately, we're coming close to the end of our time together. Brian, if you wouldn't mind, drop in our chat if I've missed any questions. I think we've been trying to get them as we've been going, but kind of as we wrap up, where do you see Fedora going? If that's a year or 5 years or just future looking, what do you see, or where would you like to see Fedora?
So we're actually working on this. We about almost 7 years ago now, we started a thing called Fedora Next, which was looking at our next 5 years of strategy at that point. And those 5 years are done. And so we're kind of at a point right now of looking at what our next 5 years, 3 to 5 years of strategy are. So it's something we're actually kind of working on. I haven't kind of figured out all of the specifics, and predicting the future is hard, but a goal that I have is doubling the number of active contributors, so doubling the number of people who are working on the project in a meaningful way every week. Right now that's about 250 people who are involved pretty heavily, and I'd like to get that to 500. I think that's basically my goal, and I think that that as a top level goal, that will result in a lot of other things, a lot more things being done, a lot more different use cases being covered, a lot more polish. Hopefully, a lot of these things that feel like underfilled non-engineering roles. Having more people who are involved and excited in that, and I think through that we can get a lot of market growth, a lot more people who have have Fedora Linux available to them and can be part of this thing where we have an operating system that we all own and are all making better together. That's the thing, and I think through that we'll be in a lot more spaces, a lot more IoT. I mentioned the Fedora mobile thing. That's really hard getting into mobile. Microsoft tried it and decided, nah, we give up. But I think there is room for that. This is an operating system that we own in the mobile space, so I'm excited for that kind of thing happening. I'd like to see more people's different desktop environments. I'd like it to be easier for the respins, the updated ISOs to be produced and be get some more QA and be official, so you can easily have those kind of things. Yeah. All sorts of possibilities technically, and we basically continue, as open source software continues to develop, we want to make sure that we're in a good place to deliver that nicely to users in whatever form.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong when you got something that's working and growing and making a difference. There's nothing wrong with doing more of the same.
Oh, I want to grab this question here.
Sure.
There's a question. Can we have an informal meeting? Should there be an interaction session weekly with the contributors? Yes, there is a Fedora social hour every Thursday. We alternate doing it in I'm in the U.S. Eastern time zone, so I'm going to call it by Eastern time zone things. We have a morning time and an evening time slot, so they can work for EU and people in the West Coast, or people after work, or people. We've got some people joining us from India in what are very admirable time zones for them to be coming to do a tech call. So yeah, you're very welcome to come to the Fedora Social Hour. Thank you for pointing that out in the chat, because I would definitely like to invite people to that. It's a fun time to hang out. And then of course we do have the Matrix chat thing that's always there, and discussion.fedoraproject.org forum, where there's a social section. You can kind of hang out there as well, kind of asynchronous way.
Yeah, do you know the Fedora Matrix server URL off the top of your head?
Yeah, I do.
I've been looking for it.
I named it, so I know it's chat.fedoraproject.org.
Project, that's what I was missing.
Yes, fedoraproject.org. The fedora.org domain, do not go there. Not us.
Gotcha. Fedoraproject.org. Okay. Cool. All right, I've got that one on my Matrix server here, because admittedly I was looking on my search engine and couldn't find it while also trying to manage the chat, the stream, and the conversation. So thank you for having that, and thank you to Conan Kudo for bailing me out. That's if we paid him, that would be his initial job title, is bailing Eric out of things he forgets. So yeah, I admittedly, if the RHEL team ever got sick of me, and I'd come running to you to do this kind of thing with for Fedora, but Brian, any last minute thoughts or questions you want to share before we wrap?
No, thanks so much, Matthew, for being here. This was an awesome interview, and awesome to hear from you and all the great things that's going over with Fedora. So thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah, this was a great conversation, and I kind of did a little happy dance with Brian when I said we got this one scheduled. So actually, I dropped the ball as one of our hosts, and I think in 2 weeks, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're doing a RHEL-based home lab episode. We're going to have one of our technical account managers on to talk about his move from packages to Podman in his home lab and some of the fun projects he's got going on there. I think there's some Minecraft. I think there's some home automation in there. So we're going to do a little bit of community focused stuff, or kind of more hobbyist focused stuff the next couple of episodes. Kind of take a breather before we get into some of the big product announcements and Red Hat Summit. Which, by the way, if you are interested, hang out. Head over to, I believe it's redhat.com/summit. You can register for free. A lot of great content. I believe I will be a part of 2.5 presentations at Summit. So a lot of cool stuff. We'll talk a lot about RHEL. And I guess Brian, there's other products within Red Hat, like an open shutter thing or open shift or something like that.
Something
I know
like
some
that.
of our OpenShift people are watching, so I have to give our friends and the other BUs a hard time. But Matthew, thanks you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time and your passion for Fedora and for Fedora Linux. And thank you to everyone who watched this live. We're trying to grow the show. We're trying to cover more. We're trying to.
Yeah, I have the same question though. How are you half of a presentation? Are you getting yanked off vaudeville style partway through? Is that?
If that were the case, it would actually be the other way around. I would be yanking someone else off the stage because they're doing the first half, and I'm doing more the technical piece. So I'm co-presenting on one. But I get to be the one with the vaudeville hook and get to go out and say, okay, now that he's said his piece, now let's get our keyboards out because this is going to be fun.
All right, that makes sense.
All right, so Matt DM on Twitter, on Matrix, on all the things. You can find him hanging around the Fedora Social Hour, all the Fedora things. So if you haven't started contributing, please do so, because there's always something exciting. There's amazing people that are contributors or big fans of Fedora. So let my friends use Fedora. Anyway, we'll see you all in 2 weeks to talk about home labs using RHEL and Podman. And until then, thank you all so much for joining us. Brian, thank you for co-hosting with me, and we'll see you next time.